Ma'am, this is an active entry point, not a bus stop. Walk-ups go around. You lost. Corporal Trace Kellerman said it loud enough for the first 3 cars in the lane to hear, and he said it with a smile, because a smile made it a joke, and a joke made him the one in charge. He was 22 years old, and he had been running the vehicle lane at the main gate of the post for 4 months, and in that time, he had learned that the fastest way to feel tall was to find someone smaller and stand over them. The woman on the far side of the painted line did not look small in any way he could have named, and that annoyed him. She was somewhere in her middle 30s, in a plain windbreaker and travel clothes that had been slept in on a bus or a plane, a single canvas duffel over one shoulder. She had walked up on foot in the gray light of a weekday morning. No car, no sponsor waiting, no reason he could see to be standing at a controlled entrance to an army installation at 7 in the morning. "I'm reporting in," she said. That was all. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She did not do any of the small, nervous things civilians did at his gate. She simply stood there with her feet a little apart and her hands loose at her sides, and she waited. Kellerman let his smile widen. "Reporting in," he repeated, for the benefit of the pickup idling behind her. "You got orders?" "I do." "Then you know walk-ups clear through the visitor center, not my lane." He flicked 2 fingers at the sedan behind her, waving it up around her, and the driver eased forward, and the woman stepped back a single measured pace to let it pass. She did not glare at the driver. She did not glare at Kellerman. She watched the car go by with the mild attention of someone watching weather, and then she looked back at the corporal and waited again. Inside the guard booth, Staff Sergeant Vic Amory looked up from the access terminal. Amory was 48, and had spent more of his life in uniform than out of it, and he had learned a long time ago to trust the thing in his chest that went quiet before his head caught up. It had gone quiet now. He watched the woman through the smudged glass and could not have told anyone what had tripped it. She stood the way a piling stands in surf, letting the water break against her and go on around her, taking the push and giving nothing back. People did not stand like that. People shifted their weight and folded their arms and checked their phones. She simply held. "Corporal," Amory said through the doorway. "Run her in the system. Save us all some time." "No hit, Sergeant," Kellerman said, without checking again. "I already looked. She's not in there." That was the truth as far as it went. Margot Ellison's credentials had not gone active in the access database yet, because Margot Ellison was reporting to her new post one day early, and the system that would recognize her tomorrow did not recognize her today. She could have said all of that. She could have said a great many things. She had learned, in rooms and roads far from this one, that saying less was almost always the stronger move, and that a person who needed to be believed usually was not, and a person who did not need anything at all was the one to watch. So she said, "It will clear tomorrow. I am early." "Course you are," Kellerman said, and grinned at the pickup driver, and the pickup driver did not grin back, which Kellerman did not notice. He had already decided what she was. He had built the whole story in the 4 seconds it took her to walk up. A lost dependent, or a girlfriend chasing a soldier, or one of the confused civilians who wandered up to the wrong gate and had to be pointed at the highway. It was a comfortable story. It let him keep his lane and his smile and his sense that the morning belonged to him. Amory did not have a comfortable story. Amory had a quiet chest and a woman in a windbreaker who was not afraid of him. And in his experience, the people who were not afraid at a gate were either fools or the most dangerous people alive. And this woman did not have one single thing about her that read as a fool. He came the rest of the way out of the booth and stood in the doorway with his coffee going cold in his hand, and he watched her, and the morning tightened around all of them like a strap being drawn. She was a nobody in travel clothes at a gate she was about to command, and only one man in the booth felt the ground move. Kellerman decided to make her wait. It was a small power, and he liked small powers, and so he turned to the next car and made a show of checking a decal that did not need checking, while the woman stood on the far side of his painted line with her duffel and her patience. "You can stand there all day," he told her over his shoulder. "Does not change anything." "I know," she said. Something in the flat ease of it made him turn back around. He had wanted a flinch, or a plea, or the particular whine of a civilian who thought rank meant fairness. He had gotten 2 words, and nothing under them. He studied her, hunting for the soft place, and found instead that she was studying him the same way, without heat, the way a person reads a map. "Where are you reporting?" he said, making it a test now instead of a question. She answered him in a cadence he did not have a word for, clipped and exact, unit and date and sponsor laid down like stones. No wasted breath, no rising note at the ends of her sentences. It was the way a person talked on a radio when other people's lives were riding on being understood the first time, and Kellerman had never heard it in his life, and so it did not mean anything to him. It meant something to Amory. Amory had heard men talk like that. Not many. A few, in a few bad places, and every one of them had turned out to be worth 10 of anyone standing near them when it mattered. He set his coffee on the sill of the booth and didn't take his eyes off her. She held out a folded set of orders, paper, the old-fashioned kind, and as her sleeve slid back, Amory saw the forearm. There was a scar along the outside of it, faded to the color of old rope, the kind of long, ridged mark that a body only gets one way, from being close to something that came apart with great violence and living through it. It was not a kitchen scar. It was not a fell-off-a-bike scar. Amory had one like it on his own leg, and he knew exactly what it was. And he looked from the scar to her eyes and found them calm in a way that stopped his breath for a second, because it was not the calm of a person who had never been afraid. It was the calm of a person who had been more afraid than this, so much more afraid than this, that a corporal at a gate simply did not register. "You think standing there quiet makes you important," Kellerman said. He said it to be cruel and to get a rise, because the not getting a rise was starting to itch at him. "No," she said. "It just passes the time." Amory took one step out of the booth and stopped. He did not know what he wanted to say. He only knew that the young man at his gate was leaning his whole weight against a door he could not see, and that on the other side of that door was something Amory did not want, opened on a Tuesday morning with cars in the lane. He said nothing yet. He was a careful man, and being careful had kept him alive, and so he watched and he waited and he hoped the corporal would get bored. The corporal did not get bored. The corporal had found someone who would not fight back, and there is a particular kind of young man for whom that is not a mercy, but an invitation. The old sergeant had seen that stillness before, in places he did not talk about at cookouts, and now it was standing at his gate in a windbreaker, holding a piece of paper, and every instinct he owned was telling him to be somewhere else. A second young military policeman drifted over from the pedestrian turnstile, drawn the way the young are always drawn to a crowd forming around someone else's small humiliation. He was a private, newer even than Kellerman, and he arrived already grinning because Kellerman was grinning, and that was how it worked. "What have we got?" the private said. "We got a walk-up who is real sure she belongs here," Kellerman said, loud, pitching it to the lane. "No car. No hit in the system. But she is reporting in." He put a spin on the last 2 words like they were the punchline of a joke he had told before. The private laughed on cue. "Reporting into what? The bus stop?" "That is what I said." Kellerman was warming now, feeding on the audience. He looked the woman up and down, slow, making a performance of it. "Let me guess. Boyfriend on the inside. Came to surprise him. He's going to be real surprised. The woman said nothing. She had shifted her duffel higher on her shoulder, and she stood with the same even weight she had held for 10 minutes, and she let the words go past her the way she had let the cars go past her. There was no wounded pride in her face for them to poke at. There was nothing for them to poke at, and that, more than anything, was what kept them poking, because a boy who cannot get a reaction will keep raising the stakes until he does. They gave her a nickname. Kellerman called her the tourist, and the private repeated it. And for a minute, the two of them ran it back and forth like a ball, the tourist this and the tourist that, while the drivers in the lane watched through their windshields and said nothing, and were ashamed in the small, private way of people who see a thing going wrong and decide it is not theirs to stop. "Knock it off," Amory said from the booth. He said it tired, not sharp, and that was a mistake, and he knew it the second it left him. "We are just talking, Sergeant," Kellerman said, and the private smirked, and the two of them traded a look that Amory had seen 1,000 times in 1,000 young faces. The look that said the old man had gone soft, that the old man did not get it, that the old man could be waited out. Contempt travels downhill and pools at the bottom, and the woman was standing at the bottom, and the two boys were pouring it on her because it cost them nothing, and because no one had stopped them, and because stopping was not a thing they had been taught to do on their own. She looked for one moment at Amory. Just a flick of the eyes, there and gone. It was not a plea. It was almost the opposite. It was a woman taking the measure of the one man present who might understand what was about to be a problem, and filing him where he belonged, and going back to waiting. Amory felt it land on him like a hand on the shoulder, and he did not understand it, and it frightened him more than shouting would have. If you have ever stood in a crowd and watched the young forget what the old have paid, and felt your jaw tighten and your hands go still, then stay with this one to the end, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault, because the next few minutes are the reason this story exists. Two boys in uniform were laughing at a gate, and not one of them had looked at the scar. Kellerman decided the joke had run its course, and a joke that has run its course leaves a young man of his particular make feeling emptied out and irritable, needing the next thing. He came around the front of the barrier arm, into her space, close enough now that the performance dropped away, and something harder took its place. "All right," he said. "You are holding up my lane. Step back behind the line and wait for the visitor center to open, or turn around and walk back the way you came. Those are your two choices." "I would like to show you my orders," the woman said. "They are in my jacket. I am going to reach for them slowly." She meant it as a courtesy. She had learned the courtesy in a world where a sudden hand near a pocket could get a person killed, and so she narrated her own movement, kept it slow, kept it telegraphed, the way a professional does around people who are frightened and armed. She lifted her right hand and moved it, without haste, toward the inside of the windbreaker. Kellerman saw a hand going into a jacket. He did not see courtesy. He was 22, and keyed up and empty, and had spent a quarter of an hour building a story in which this woman was a problem. And now her hand was moving toward a pocket he could not see into, and every bad training video and every locker room story collided in him at once, and he did the thing that fear dressed as authority always does. He grabbed. He seized her wrist in both hands and used his weight, all of it, to drive her forward and down, and he slammed her chest. First against the barrier arm of the checkpoint, the painted steel pole ringing dully with the impact, her duffel spilling off her shoulder to the pavement. And she went with it. That was the thing Amory would remember later, the thing he would not be able to explain to the investigators without sounding strange. She did not fight the throw. She did not stiffen against it the way a frightened person does, the way that gets wrists broken and shoulders torn. She went with the force, controlled it, turned a slam that should have hurt into a thing she rode, her free hand coming up flat against the steel to save her own cheekbone, her breathing even, her body loose in exactly the places an untrained body locks. She let him put her against the barrier because letting him was less trouble than the alternative, and the alternative flickered across the morning for the length of a single breath and was gone. A driver in the third car lifted a phone, held it up, and then, catching the eye of the woman in the next lane, lowered it again without recording, as if ashamed to make it smaller by filming it. Amory was out of the booth now, moving, coffee forgotten, the quiet in his chest gone loud. Her cheek was against cold steel, and her breathing was even, and a corporal stood over her certain he had just won. Amory reached them in 5 long strides and put a hand on Kellerman's arm, not gentle. "Corporal, let her go. Right now." She resisted, Sergeant. Kellerman had his weight still pinning her, and there was a thin note in his voice now under the bravado, the note of a young man who has done a thing he cannot take back and is looking for the paperwork that will make it right. She reached for something. "I am detaining her per procedure." "You are not detaining anybody. You are holding a woman against a pole because she would not cry for you." Amory kept his voice low, for Kellerman alone, and he pulled the corporal back a half step by main strength. "Let go." Kellerman let go, but slowly, so it would look like his idea, and the woman straightened off the barrier arm without any hurry at all. She rolled her right shoulder once, testing it, the way a person checks a thing they already know is fine. She bent and picked up her duffel. She did not rub her wrist. She did not touch her cheek. She stood back up to her full height and settled her weight and looked at the 2 young men with that same flat calm. And it was the calm that finally reached through Amory's alarm and named itself. He had stood next to men who were still like that. On a rooftop once, a long time ago, with the air coming apart around them, next to a man who had gone that exact kind of quiet. And the man had done in 90 seconds what Amory still saw when he closed his eyes. "Son," Amory said to Kellerman, quiet, "I have stood next to people who moved the way she just moved. You want to be very, very careful about the next thing you do." Kellerman heard the words. He did not hear the meaning, because the meaning was in a language he had not lived long enough to learn. He heard an old sergeant covering for a civilian, and he had already committed, and a young man who is already committed will double down long past the point of sense rather than admit the ground has shifted under him. "With respect, Sergeant," she put her hand toward a concealed area after being given lawful instruction, he said, reciting it now, building his record out loud. He pulled the flex cuffs from his belt. "I'm going to secure her and let the desk sort it out. Corporal." "It is procedure, Sergeant." Amory looked at the woman. She looked back at him, and something passed between them that had no words in it, an old currency, the recognition of one who has been in it, by another who has been in it. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not now. Let it play. She was telling him to stand down, and he understood that she was telling him to stand down, and the strangeness of a woman in flex cuffs calming the sergeant who was trying to save her was almost more than Amory could hold. What the boy in the pressed uniform did not know is what the next 90 seconds were about to teach him, and it is a lesson that doesn't wash out. If a story like this one matters to you, subscribe to the Veteran Vault, so the next forgotten name finds the people who need to hear it. The old sergeant stepped back with the face of a man who has heard the safety click off in a dark room, and the boy kept talking, and somewhere a staff car turned onto the approach road with a small flag snapping at its fender. 14 years earlier, and 7,000 miles away, on a road with no name that the maps marked only as a route number, Sergeant Margot Ellison sat in the right seat of the third vehicle in a convoy and watched the sun come up the color of a struck match. She was 21 years old. She had been in country 5 months. Beside her, in the driver's seat, Sergeant First Class Deke Waller drove with 2 fingers and drank coffee gone cold in a paper cup and talked, because Waller always talked, and the talking was how he kept his young soldiers loose on a road that could kill them at any meter. "You keep your people breathing, Ellison," he said that morning, the way he had said it a dozen times, because he believed it, and because he wanted her to believe it after he rotated home. "All the rest of it, the ranks and the medals and the briefings, that is noise. You keep your people breathing. That is the whole job. Everything else is just how they make you fill the time." She had laughed at him. She remembered laughing. The blast came from the culvert at the low point of the road, where the water ran under in the wet season, where they had told the engineers twice to look, and the engineers had not looked, and it lifted the lead vehicle and set it down wrong, and turned the morning into noise and dust, and the flat hammering of guns from the high ground on both sides. Waller was gone in the first 30 seconds. She would not let herself dress it up. Not then, and not in the 14 years since. He was there, and then he was not. And there was no time to grieve him because there were 11 other people on that road who were still breathing, and whose breathing was now, suddenly, her job. She keyed the radio. Her voice came out in that clipped, even cadence, the one that Kellerman would fail to understand a lifetime later, laying down grid and situation, and need in the fewest words that could carry them, because the people on the other end had to get it the first time. She got the surviving vehicles into a herringbone. She put fire back onto the high ground. She counted her people, and 2 of them were down in the open between the second and third vehicles, and the open ground was 800 meters of nothing with rounds walking across it. She went out for the first one at a dead run into the fire and dragged him back by the drag handle on his kit, and the world came apart around her, and she did not stop. She went out again for the second, and a piece of the road opened her right forearm to the bone along its outside edge, and she felt it as heat and not pain, and didn't stop, and she brought the second one in too. 43 minutes she held that road, 43 minutes from the blast to the first rotor beat coming over the ridge, and in that time, not one more of her people stopped breathing, because a 19-year-old had told a 21-year-old that this was the whole job, and the 21-year-old had listened. When the birds came in, she was the last one on, and she rode out with her hand pressed flat to a private's chest, holding pressure, watching his eyes, and the call sign the platoon had given her, that deployment came over the net one more time as they cleared the ridge. Briar. Because she was the thing you did not see in the wire until you were already in it, and because a briar holds on, and because Waller had laughed and said it fit her, and the name had stuck the way the best cruel kind nicknames stick. They kept her in a field hospital for 11 days while the forearm healed enough to travel, and she spent most of those 11 days sitting up in a cot she was not supposed to be sitting up in, checking on the 2 she had carried, because the habit of counting her people did not switch off just because the road was behind her. Both of them lived. One of them wrote her a letter every year on the anniversary. Still, 14 years on, 3 lines in a bad hand that always said the same thing in different words, which was thank you, and which she could not read without going somewhere quiet for a while. She wrote a letter of her own that first month, the hardest one, to a woman in a small town she had never met, the mother of a man who drank his coffee cold and drove with 2 lazy fingers, and had spent his last morning teaching a girl the only thing worth knowing. She did not tell the mother about the culvert or the engineers who had not looked. She told her that her son had died doing his whole job, which was keeping his people breathing, and that 11 of them were breathing because of him, and that one of them would carry what he taught her for as long as she lived. She had meant it as a comfort. She had come, over the years, to understand that it was also a promise, and that she had been keeping it every single day since, at desks, and in briefings, and now at a gate, whether or not anyone was watching. They gave her the medal for that road, the pale blue ribbon, the ceremony, the hand of the highest office in the land. She had stood through all of it with the same stillness she wore at a gate 14 years later, and she had thought the whole time about a man with cold coffee and 2 lazy fingers on a wheel who had spent his last morning teaching her the only thing worth knowing. 14 years later, she carried every one of them still, the living and the one who was not, and a boy at a gate had just put her face against cold steel and called her a tourist. Back at the gate, in the gray present, Corporal Kellerman decided to finish what he had started, because a young man who has gone too far often finds it easier to go further than to go back. He took her wrists, one and then the other, and he ran the flex cuffs around them and drew them tight, narrating it as procedure the whole time, loud, for the record, and for the private and for himself. The woman let him. She held her hands out because holding them out was less trouble than not, and she watched the middle distance with an expression that had gone somewhere far away, and only Amory was close enough to see her come back from wherever she had been. Her orders had fallen to the pavement in the struggle at the barrier. Kellerman stepped on them, ground them once under his boot without noticing, and then, when she glanced down at them, he seemed to understand for the first time that the paper meant something to her, and so he picked it up and made a show of looking at it, and then crumpled it in one hand and let it drop again. "You will get it back at the desk," he said, "if you are who you say you are." And that was the moment the stillness in her shifted. It was not much. Amory, who was watching for it, almost missed it. Her weight settled, low, the loose readiness of her body organizing itself around a center that had not been there a second before, her hands going quiet inside the ties in a way that was somehow more alarming than if she had strained against them. For one breath, the windbreaker and the travel clothes fell away, and what stood at the gate was the thing that had held a nameless road for 43 minutes, and Amory saw exactly what she could do. Saw the whole geometry of it laid out in an instant. The cuffs no barrier at all. The corporal, a problem that would take her under 2 seconds to solve and leave her free and him on the ground. And then she let it go. She chose the stillness again, the way she had chosen it every second since she walked up to the gate, and the readiness folded back down under the calm and was gone. And she was only a woman in flex cuffs with a scar on her arm and cold coffee somewhere in her past. Waiting. Amory let out a breath he had not known he was holding. He understood, in that moment, that he had just watched a person exercise more discipline, standing still, than he had shown in most of the hard moments of his own life, and that the corporal cinching ties around her wrists had no idea. None. That he was alive right now, on the sufferance of the woman he was manhandling. "Desk, this is lane 1, Kellerman said into his radio, bravado back up now that she was secured, now that the cuffs let him believe the story again. "I have got a walk-up. No system hit. Resisted lawful instruction. 1 female detained. Bringing her in." A young soldier waiting on foot at the turnstile had stopped and was staring, and the look on his face was the look of someone who can tell that a thing is wrong even when he cannot say why, and he did not walk on. She could have ended it in a second and had chosen not to, and only 2 men at that gate understood what the choosing had cost her, and one of them was afraid, and the other one did not exist yet in the story Kellerman was telling himself. The staff car came around the last curve of the approach road and slowed as it reached the back of the lane, and a small, dark flag stirred at its front fender. 2 silver stars on a field of red, and the whole rhythm of the morning changed the way a room changes when someone important walks in before anyone has seen them yet. From the front passenger seat stepped a captain in the duty uniform, a thin gold cord looped at his right shoulder, the aiguillette of an aide-de-camp. His name was Wade Somerton, and his whole job that morning was to keep the commanding general's schedule moving, and a backed-up main gate was exactly the sort of small friction he existed to smooth away. He came up the lane at an easy walk, already lifting a hand, already forming the mild question that clears a jam. "Corporal, what is the holdup? We have got the general behind." He stopped. He had come close enough to see her face, and he stopped in the middle of the word and the middle of the step, and the easy expression went off his face like a light switching off. He looked at her. He looked at the flex cuffs on her wrists, and the crumpled orders on the ground, and the red mark rising on her cheekbone where the steel had caught it. And then he looked back at her face, and Amory watched a captain of the United States Army go pale in the space of a single breath. "Captain Ellison," Somerton said. He did not say it loud. He said it the way a man says a word in church. And then he turned to Kellerman, and he crossed the last 3 steps to him, and he said 4 quiet words that the corporal would hear in his sleep for the rest of his career. "That is Captain Ellison." Kellerman blinked. "Sergeant, I do not." "Medal of Honor." Somerton's voice was still quiet, and the quiet was worse than any shout. "That is Captain Margot Ellison. She is your incoming company commander. You reported to her before she ever set foot on this post, Corporal. You just did not know it. And those are her wrists in your ties." The color went out of Kellerman's face all at once, from the top down, the way water leaves a glass. His mouth opened. Confusion first. The plain animal confusion of a man whose story has just been pulled out from under him. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head, the reflex of a mind refusing the shape of the thing. Then recognition, the awful click as the pieces came together, the scar, the cadence, the stillness, the calm that had unnerved him without his understanding why. And then, last, horror, pure and cold and total, as he understood not only what he had done, but who he had done it to, and how many people had watched him do it. Behind him, the rear door of the staff car had opened, and Major General Alden Frost was out and moving up the lane. Frost was 54, and built like a man who still ran the perimeter at dawn, and he took in the scene the way senior officers take in scenes, in one sweep, all of it. The cuffs and the orders, and the corporal's white face, and the woman standing at the center of it with her chin level. He did not ask what had happened. He could see what had happened. He crossed to Margot Ellison, and he came to attention in front of her, and he raised his hand to the brim of his cap in a salute so crisp it cracked, and he held it. "Ma'am," he said, "welcome to the post. I am sorry for how it received you." The lane went silent. Engines idled. Every face in every car had turned. The private at the turnstile had come to attention without being told. Amory, 48 years old, and long past being surprised by much, felt his own hand come up in a salute he had not decided to give. And beside him, a half-beat late, the young soldier from the turnstile saluted too. And then the drivers who were veterans. And then it rippled outward, a gate full of strangers coming to attention for a woman in a torn windbreaker with cut ties falling from her wrists. Somerton had produced a folding knife and freed her hands gently, catching the ties before they hit the ground, as if even letting them fall would be one more discourtesy. Ellison rubbed her wrists once, the first time she had tended herself all morning, and returned the general's salute, and said, "Thank you, sir. No apology needed. I reported early." Frost turned his head, and when he spoke to Kellerman his voice had dropped 40 degrees, "Corporal, you are relieved. Step back from that lane and don't touch another vehicle or another person on my post until your chain has had a very long conversation with you." A 2-star general was holding a salute for a woman in a torn windbreaker with cut restraints at her feet, and the corporal who had thrown her there was learning her name a full lifetime too late. The provost sergeant arrived within 4 minutes, summoned by a radio call that had gone out the instant Frost spoke, and he took Corporal Kellerman by the arm and walked him off the lane and out of the story he had been telling himself all morning. Kellerman went without a word. There were no words left in him. He had the hollow, scraped-out look of a young man who has just seen the whole shape of a mistake at once, all its edges, and who understands that it will be with him for a long time, and who has not yet begun to guess how long. Staff Sergeant Amory stood by the booth and said nothing, and did not need to. Frost found him with a glance, and something passed between the 2 older men, an acknowledgement, and Amory understood that the general knew exactly who at this gate had tried to stop it and who had not. It was a small vindication, and Amory did not want a larger one. He had spent his life at gates like this one, and the only reward he had ever wanted was the one he had gotten, which was to have been right in his chest when it mattered, and to have moved. Ellison bent and picked up her orders from the pavement. She smoothed the crumpled paper against her thigh, unhurried, folded it once along its old creases, and put it back inside her windbreaker. Then she looked in the direction the provost sergeant had taken Kellerman, and for the first time all morning she spoke more than a handful of words at once, and everyone near her went quiet to hear it, because a Medal of Honor recipient had been silent for an hour and was about to not be. "General," she said, "a word about the corporal." "Ma'am, I do not want him destroyed." Frost looked at her. "He put his hands on you, in front of 40 people. He restrained a decorated officer at a controlled point on my post. He put his hands on a woman in a windbreaker he had decided was nobody," Ellison said. "That is the part that matters. Not that it was me, that he did it at all, to whoever he thought I was." She was quiet a moment. He was frightened, and he was young, and no one at this gate had ever taught him to see the person in front of him instead of the story in his own head. "Punish him, sir. He earned it. But do not end him. Teach him to see people. That is the whole job. Everything else is just how we make him fill the time." She did not know she was quoting a dead man. She had carried his words so long that they had become her own, worn smooth like a stone in a pocket, and she said them to a general at a gate the way Deke Waller had said them to her on a road at dawn. And somewhere in the saying of it, the road and the gate became the same place, and the lesson went on down the line the way the only things worth anything ever do. Frost held her eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded, once. "He will face what he has to face," he said, "but he will still have a career at the end of it, if he is smart enough to want one. On your word, Captain. On my word, sir. If you have ever watched someone be handed the power to ruin another person and choose instead to make them better, and felt the tightness in your chest turn into something you did not expect, then do this small thing. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the veteran vault, and leave a word below, and let this old road find the people who still walk it." She reported in that day, after all, once the desk had been sorted, and the general's schedule had bent around a thing more important than a schedule, and by the following week she stood at the head of the very military police company that ran the gates of the post, Corporal Trace Kellerman somewhere in its ranks. He did not know, that first week, whether she would look at him. He had lain awake more than one night with the 4 quiet words going around in his head. That is Captain Ellison. And he had rehearsed 100 apologies and thrown all of them away as too small. He had asked the provost sergeant once what he was supposed to do, and the provost sergeant, an old hand, had told him the truth, which was that there was nothing he could do except become the kind of soldier who would never do it again. and let that be the apology, because it was the only one that would ever be worth anything. So he became careful. He learned the thing Amory had known for 30 years, the thing that cannot be taught in a classroom and only takes in the ones who have been humbled enough to learn it, which is that everyone who walks up to your gate is a person with a whole life behind them, and that the ones who are quiet and give you nothing back are very often the ones who have paid the most, and that you will almost never know which is which. And so you treat all of them as though they might be the one who once held a nameless road alone. It was Amory, in the end, who took the boy in hand, because that is what the old sergeants do, and because the general had asked him to without quite asking. Amory did not lecture him. He simply put Kellerman on the walk-up lane, the pedestrian gate, where the traffic was slow and human, and every person came through on foot with a face, and he stood beside the corporal for a week and made him look at each one. "This is somebody's grandmother," Amory would say. "Quiet. This one just buried his father. Look at his eyes. This one has been up for 30 hours and is scared of being late. You do not know their stories, Corporal, and you will almost never know, and that is exactly why you give every one of them the same thing, which is the benefit of the doubt and a little plain human courtesy, because the day you decide somebody is a buddy is the day you find out they were the most somebody you ever met." Kellerman did not argue. He had been cured of arguing at a barrier arm in front of 40 cars. He listened, and he watched the faces, and slowly, the way it takes in the ones who have been humbled enough to let it, the lesson took. It was a gray morning, much like the first one when she came through his lane again. She was in uniform now, the eagle rank and the ribbons, the pale blue at the top of the rack that made men who knew what it was go still. She came up on foot again, the way she liked to, walking the perimeter of her own command in the early light, and Corporal Kellerman saw her coming and straightened, and for one bad second, the old panic rose in him. Then he did the only thing there was to do. He came to attention, and he brought his hand up in a salute that was the most correct salute of his young life, every angle of it right, and he held it, and he waited to see if she would take it. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a moment with those calm eyes that had unnerved him so badly the first time, and there was no cruelty in them, and no forgiveness spoken out loud either, only a kind of level attention, the attention of a person who was giving him the thing he had refused to give her, which was the simple dignity of being seen. She returned his salute, crisp, unhurried, complete. "Corporal," she said. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice only shook a little. "Eyes open today," she said. It was not a threat, and it was not quite a kindness. It was an instruction, the same one she gave herself every morning, the same one a man with cold coffee had given her on the last morning of his life. Keep your people breathing. See the person in front of you. That is the whole job." "Yes, ma'am," Kellerman said, and she nodded, and the barrier arm rose, the same painted steel pole he had once slammed her against, lifting now without a word to let its own commander walk through, and Margot Ellison went on up the road, into the gray light, with her hands loose at her sides, and her weight even, and the whole quiet weight of a nameless road, carried invisibly behind her. Kellerman held his salute until she was through the gate and well up the road. He did not have to. No regulation required it. He held it because he finally understood what it was for, and because some debts cannot be paid in words, but only in the long, slow currency of becoming better, and because a woman, he had once decided, was nobody, had turned out to be the truest somebody he would ever stand near, and had let him live to learn it. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.